Hey guys, LC Holt here, and this is my update for the first week of September. And today, we're going to be talking about Star Wars. Nothing like Star Wars.
Da, 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 da.
Da-da. So anyway, with me and Rebecca, we've known each other for years. We met first day of college, first class, and I think one of the first things we talked about was probably her love for Star Wars. I'm trying to tame my hair as I'm looking at myself in this thing.
It wasn't just my love of Star Wars. It was also my love of Mr. Mark Hamill.
That's true, and we're going to be talking about that today as well. Because how could we talk about Star Wars, the original trilogy, without talking about, Mark Hamill?
That's right.
And
Marky Mark and the Hamill bunch.
That's right. So we're going to kind of go through it. And, looking at the thumbnail, as Rebecca pointed out, some people might say, well, are you talking about the original trilogy or the special edition? And we're going to talk about both. But first, we're going to talk about kind of how this whole Star Wars thing started. It started with a guy named George Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, George Lucas was a USC film student around the same time of other people you might have known, like Robert Zemeckis.
Just a few.
Yeah, Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg. He was of that generation. He liked to ride around in his car in Southern California. He was a cruiser. And he made a little movie about that before he made Star Wars. A movie called American Graffiti.
Yeah.
American Gigolo. No,
Graffiti.
American Graffiti.
Which I heard the story behind that was he had done THX and people had said, oh, it's, a sterile film, no heart.
Bleak.
And he was like, well, I'll make a movie with heart. And he did American Graffiti, which they wanted to call it A Night in Modesto because they felt American Graffiti was a weird title they couldn't sell.
Well,
but yeah.
I think
that's what I read.
American Graffiti is a good title.
I love that title.
Yeah.
It's one of my faves.
And that was one that he had to develop the script for quite some time because, as you said, he had already done THX 1138, which, if you've heard of THX, the sound system, well, that's where it came from because Lucas developed that sound system and named it after this first film, the first feature film that he directed. He did a short about that kind of bleak, sterile future you were talking about, and then he, while he was at film school, and when I took a tour at USC one time, and they showed a lot of their alumni's old films. The people who have gone on to be very successful, and one of the ones they showed was THX. The original short film from George Lucas, and one from Steven Spielberg called Amblin, which eventually he named his first company. Yep. Spielberg did Amblin. But anyway, back to George Lucas. He decided he was going to do the opposite of what he had done with THX, which was a very sort of an artistic, downcast film. In terms of its attitude toward the world, it's pretty bleak. I said it before.
Yeah.
So what he wanted to do originally was Flash Gordon. He wanted to do an exciting, fun, fantastical film.
Yes, based on the old serials.
The old serials of Flash Gordon, and he originally, literally, wanted to do Flash Gordon, but the problem was ultimately he couldn't get the rights. He signed a 2-picture deal after American Graffiti with United Artists, which is kind of ironic because he never actually made any movies with United Artists. But he had a 2-picture deal, and he said, well, there are these 2 things I'd like to do. And one of them was Star Wars. And they were like, I don't get it. What is that? Well, actually, it was Flash Gordon, and they tried to get those rights. They couldn't get them. And then he was like, well, there's the Star Wars thing, which is like my version. If they're not going to give me Flash Gordon, I'll make my own.
That's right.
Yeah. Which is in hindsight, is kind of a very George Lucas-y kind of attitude. I'll just do it myself. Because he was definitely of that generation where
Cameron was all those guys were like that.
It was an auteur generation. Martin Scorsese, all these guys. Francis Ford Coppola, certainly, who was a guy that George Lucas buddied up with to the extent of having their joint company together. They were in business together.
Yeah, he produced Graffiti.
Yeah. Yeah, and George Lucas actually had a lot to do with helping him edit The Godfather. When that time comes, so some of the really interesting bits in The Godfather were edited by George Lucas, who took bits of footage and just sort of cut them together. Because if you see like George Lucas's earlier stuff, that was the thing that really took me when I saw the short film of THX. It's really heady, strange, artsy type stuff.
Yes.
And it seems like I saw another one that was based on an E.E. Cummings poem. And it's really abstract, like really far out there abstract. Not bad, just very surrealistic, almost to like the David Lynch area. So it's weird to think of George Lucas.
Which he comes back into the picture.
He does. He is eventually going to get into this. But let's get on into like when he started writing Star Wars, because we got like a whole trilogy to cover here.
Yes, that's a lot.
Yeah, he started writing in January of 1973. Quite a few years before they made the movie. Actually, quite a few years before he wrote the final draft, because there were many drafts of this original Star Wars script. The original one, he had outlined this thing called the Journal of the Wills, which was about a guy named C.J. Thorpe was the main character. And he was like being trained by this space commando named Mace Windy. He got that. He really loved this whole Mace Win something name, because he carried that for quite some time. But in the original draft of the Journal of the Wills, that was going to be the name of, I guess, like the Obi-Wan Kenobi character.
Yeah.
And
they said that like one of his drafts, was very based off of the Japanese film Hidden Fortress.
Yeah, we were talking about that. Hidden Fortress, yeah. And so he had a lot of, another thing, he was really into the Joseph Conrad hero's journey.
Yes.
And if you look at that Star Wars, it's very much a hero's journey. It follows that formula that Joseph Conrad set out.
Well, I remember my sister reading The Hero's Journey and studying it in college. And she's actually online right now. She's Joseph Campbell.
There you go.
And
what did I say? Did I say something else?
I don't know what you said.
Joseph Campbell.
Yes. And on the cover, they had like a little, collage of people. And there's Luke Skywalker at Dagobah holding his little blaster gun on the cover of the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that she studied in college.
Which seems apropos. Because one of the original elements that was in this first version of the script was the idea of a Jedi Bendu.
Yes.
So that was already there. The idea Jedi was already there, or at least the name of it. Now, this was the thing that United Artists looked at and was like, we're not going to make that movie. Like, this is too weird. Eventually, Alan Ladd Jr. Over at 20th Century Fox. Now, what's interesting there, we've been talking on this other episodes with our buddy Damien Maffei about the Alien series. And Alien, and even though Alien came later, you get a lot of like Alan Ladd talk when you talk about either of those, because both were 20th Century Fox movies, and Alan Ladd Jr. was very instrumental in getting both Star Wars and the later film Ridley Scott's Alien going. So we are kind of all tying these things together.
Yes.
One of the smart things George Lucas did in this deal with Alan Ladd Jr., and I think Ladd is on record as saying he didn't understand it. Like, he didn't really understand this thing, but he believed in George Lucas. So he was kind of betting on the filmmaker. So probably because he didn't really understand what the story was or what he had, that allowed George Lucas to have this deal drawn up in which he would retain sequel rights. Because George Lucas has been writing this thing for many, many years, and he has all these ideas. So he's, I'm sure, thinking at this point, well, maybe I could take this and make a franchise out of it.
Yeah.
I myself am not 100% convinced that George had this all plotted out. Personally, I think he might have had some ideas he thought he could use in the future.
He had a treatment.
He had an idea. I'll go so far as to say I think he had an idea. And so he did this thing. But anyway, he retained the sequel rights and most of the merchandise.
Yes.
Which that's very important.
It's very important. But also, if you have some of the first merchandising from the first movie, particularly, I had what was my brother's. He had one of the C-3PO dolls. And on the back of it, it doesn't say Lucasfilm Limited. It says 20th Century Fox.
Really? So that must have been their share.
Must have been.
They got that money.
But the later figures, particularly when Empire comes out, it's LFL stamped on it.
Now, this wasn't the C-3PO you were telling me about one time where the tape came out of his
No.
pouch.
That was later. That was the Hall of Shame. No.
Yeah.
That was much later. This was, they came out with the Princess Leia doll and they came out with the C-3PO. That was the same height.
You should explain real quick the tape dispenser.
Okay, in Wizard magazine in the 90s, I'm dating myself here, they had what was called the Hall of Shame. And on the Hall of Shame, they had a C-3PO tape dispenser where he's sitting and his knees are bent.
Kind of reclining.
Yes, reclining, and his legs are open, and the tape roll sits in between the legs, and you pull the tape out between his legs.
It comes out of his
very provocative tape dispenser.
And a C-3PO of all characters, like the least sexual character. He wrote 4 different versions of this script, I should say. General Anakin Starkiller.
Yes, they were star killers at that point. They
right.
weren't Skywalking yet.
And he was a grown man, too.
Yes.
He didn't turn into an adolescent until later.
Yeah.
As they went through this. And I think Chewbacca was based on George Lucas's dog.
Yes.
Alaskan Malamute. Indiana.
Yes.
Yep. Which he used that name. He got some play out of that name, too, later on.
That dog gave him so much inspiration.
But then he changed the main character's name from Anakin to Luke.
Yeah.
And changed it to an adolescent boy, but he kept Anakin as the father. He liked that name, apparently. I mean, it's a good name. So he kept that on there, but he made him a younger man, the main character. And then at one point, it wasn't in the original script, but the Force came about as a concept later on. I think it was like 3rd or 4th draft.
Yeah.
The idea of the Force being this mystical energy, which I like the idea of it being.
See, I like it being mystical rather than a blood count.
Yeah.
To me, that took, the magic out of it for me.
And by the way, spoilers, we're going to do that trilogy too. We're just not going to do it yet.
Yes.
But we're getting there.
Yes.
Ralph McQuarrie did a lot of conceptual drawings. Ralph McQuarrie is a great artist.
I was going to say, beautiful.
Amazing.
Beautiful concept art.
And I think it was real helpful for George Lucas to be able to get this concept art and show it to someone like Alan Ladd Jr. And the production designers, because like John Barry worked on this film, who was from the Bond tradition, and Christian Roger, or Roger Christian. Roger Christian worked on this as well, and he also worked on the Alien films. So it's all kind of tying together a little bit. He even worked on Alien 3. He went all the way down, Roger Christian did, the line with a lot of these alien films. Budget eventually increased based a lot on these conceptual drawings from, I think it was like $4 to $8 ultimately $1 million, which if you think about that nowadays, you go, a movie that big was made for $8 million, but you have to take into account inflation.
Yes.
But still not a lot of money. Certainly not for a space, epic. Now the final draft was finished in 1976. And it was worked on, though they're not credited, by Gloria Katz and William Huck, who had wrote the final draft of Graffiti. So he was calling on his friends, and they were husband and wife. And they also went on to write the immortal classic Howard the Duck. But we'll try and forget about that. They wrote they helped Lucas write his final draft for the original Star Wars. And even as the film was being made and shot and edited, there were other people who helped out. Like there is
Gary Kurtz. Gary Kurtz.
Gary Kurtz, the producer. And he was really instrumental with helping George Lucas make this first trilogy. I think that's safe to say.
Yes.
Because he offered creative feedback that was not just like blow smoke.
Yeah. I think between him, Gary Kurtz, and Lucas's first wife, Marcia, I think that because she was a film editor in Hollywood, I think that really. Yes,
because we're going to get into that first cut here shortly. First, though, I wanted to talk about some of the ideas with the design. Lucas came up with this idea of a used future, like a future that looks like it's been around for a while.
Used space.
We're not talking necessarily about Blade Runner kind of used future where it's like, oh my God, this is grimy and dirty.
But he grew up in the 50s when space movies came out. Everything was sleek. Everything looked brand new. And he just thought, well, shit's got to get used. And a car wears out.
And he would know about that.
Yeah, his car,
But when you think about the story, this galaxy has been through a lot of shit.
Yes.
By the time New Hope begins, Episode 4, The New Hope, is the first Star Wars film. So Episode 1 through 3, which is only really discussed in backstory in this trilogy, you just know a lot of bad stuff happened, and now everything has fallen to hell. The Galactic Empire has taken over, overthrown the Republic, killed all the Jedi who used to be these like sort of knights with laser swords, otherwise known as lightsabers, who defended the galaxy. All that is gone, though. There are no Jedis left.
The Republic is gone. The old Republic.
The old Republic is gone, been overthrown. And a lot of this trilogy, this story, is about finding hope again in the galaxy that has so much darkness in it. Because the Galactic Emperor, who we don't meet in this movie, we get a kind of glimpse of him in the second one, and then we fully see him in Jedi. He's not a good guy. We should also mention Industrial Light and Magic.
Yes.
Van Nuys, California. George Lucas decided that he didn't really have much of a choice because 20th Century Fox's special effects department, post department, was not in great shape. In fact, some say even non-existent at this point. So he was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to make a lot of them.
You also have to think that 20th Century Fox had been in kind of financial.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, they've been on the decline at this point because we're in the 70s. The studio system is over. Films are still trying to find their bearing, especially studio films are trying to find their bearing. And a lot of, independent films started really in the 70s. Yeah. And it's interesting, George Lucas is making a huge studio movie. Actually, not a huge studio movie, but a studio movie like he was an independent filmmaker.
That's what I was going to say, basically,
he was bringing that. They don't
have it, so I have to start something.
And Coppola did that too with The Godfather. He was bringing this independent spirit of, hey guys, let's just get together and we're going to do this, and dragging it into the studio system, which was not necessarily used to it. But as I was saying about Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas realized I need an effects department that can really make this stuff look real. Yeah. So he was like, I'll start my own in Van Nuys, California. And he did. And that's how ILM was born. It had some growing pains initially because I think a lot of the folks that worked there at first had sort of a hippie laid back, and as post went on and this thing was dragging out and George was feeling the pressure, he realized like these shots aren't getting done. We got to figure something out here. And so he organized a few people. I think he had to get rid of a few people, but he organized like a guy that could really get in there and show them how to do it. Because as much as we all like to hang out and talk and listen to music, we are making a movie here, and we need to get that part.
There's some deadlines.
But as we're also tying into our Alien show in so much as you have the culture difference between the American crews and the British crews, because this was shot mostly. The Tatooine stuff was shot in Tanzania.
Yes.
But like 14 weeks they shot in Elstree Studios in London.
All
14 weeks. That's a long time.
Yeah.
No wonder that George nearly died.
I was going to say,
because he's this really like skinny, laid back guy, and he just seems like he's moving and grooving to the times. And he's just in the middle of this amazing shitstorm where time and money, and he's got this studio movie to deliver. Nobody understands what this giant dog is doing over here.
Yep. He thinks the cantina scene looks like shit. He isn't getting what he wants. So.
And Gilbert Taylor, who was the DP on this first film, did not return for the others. No. Not surprising. Did not understand the George Lucas vision.
Yeah.
He basically said, listen, kid, tell me what you want and I'll light it. I'll shoot it, because that is the British tradition of a lighting cameraman.
Yeah.
And George Lucas was the guy that threw a camera on his shoulder and went out and started shooting stuff back in Southern California in film school, and even with THX and American Graffiti. Well, that wasn't really the case here, because he had this sort of go with the flow of what they wanted to do. Photography began March 22nd, 1976. Yeah. So it's been a long road from conception to starting to shoot this. And as you said, the interiors, most of the Death Star and all that kind of stuff was in Elstree Studios in London. Now, do you want to talk a little bit about the casting?
Well, I know that he used Harrison to kind of as a reader, you know. So if you ever watch the old footage of the audition tapes, it's usually Harrison there reading, which he had worked with Harrison on American Graffiti. And then eventually Harrison was cast as Han Solo.
Han Solo,
yes.
who was originally supposed to have green skin.
Yeah.
I'm sure glad he didn't.
Yeah, that would have been.
It's been kind of weird.
Yeah.
Because then you'd have Chewie and then this green skin guy.
Yeah. And then there's Carrie Fisher, who's cast as Princess Leia. Of course, she always told the story about how, they thought she was a little too pudgy for the role. She needed to lose some weight. And she always joked, I knew Jodie Foster had auditioned for this. And good God, if I don't, get where they want me to be, they're going to bring old Jodie out.
Yeah.
And then Luke Skywalker.
And you
Mark
can see
Hamill.
with a lot of these screen tests, some famous faces.
Yes.
Before they were famous, like, Kurt Russell.
Yes, Kurt Russell.
He auditioned. William Katz auditioned. Pre-Carrie, which is interesting because this was being done at the same time. So
Yeah.
De Palma actually had a lot to do with this original Star Wars in a lot of ways, because when he did the, skipping ahead just a little bit to the finished film or the first cut of the film, the crawl that opens the movie, De Palma saw that and was like, oh, George, now stop. That's gibberish. That doesn't make any sense. It's like, sit down. Let me write this for you. And so him and De Palma and George Lucas sat down and they wrote a simplified version of the crawl that you now read. So Brian De Palma was very helpful in casting and at least in the crawl, helping to write the crawl at the end. But anyway, I'm going to sit back now and let you talk about Mark Hamill, because you were starting to and then I interrupted you.
Well, one story is that Robert Englund told him, hey, here they're casting. I've heard since then that's not really how it happened, but that used to be the story that went around, that Robert Englund was like, hey, but I think Hamill's agent probably had it taken care of before that. Mark Hamill, he had done a lot of TV spots. I mean, he'd been on The Partridge Family, Streets of San Francisco. He'd done like a voiceover on the Genie cartoon. So he'd done a lot of TV guest appearances over the years. And so he gets cast as Luke Skywalker. So this is like his first really, major role in a motion picture. So yeah. Yep.
And what a role it is. I think while they were filming, though, everyone was a little bit confused.
Yes, and I'd seen in interviews where he kind of said, well, if I say it like George seems to be fine with it in the first film. He's like, and then he would, how would George say it? And he's like, oh, Luke's George,
Because the old line that the actors used to say about George's dialogue is,
you can type this shit, but you can't say it.
Right. George is great. George is a great idea man.
Yes.
But he does need help with scripts.
And Harrison got to tweak his dialogue a lot more than obviously Carrie or Mark Hamill. Yeah.
Well, and I think Harrison probably could intimidate George Lucas a little bit, because Harrison was always a little bit of an edgy guy,
Yeah.
You got to watch out with him, because he'll just tell you exactly what he thinks about whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think also the reasoning was, well, Han Solo's kind of, laid back and could kind of get away with a little bit more than
and a lot of
dialogue-wise.
And we can also say that the crew did not respect this movie. They saw it as being a children's film.
Yes, it was going to be a B movie. It was going to.
They didn't nobody really got it, except George, I think, had it.
Yeah.
He had it in his head what he wanted. It was just the process of trying to get it there, which, as I said, went $1 million over budget, but a lot of that having to do with the effects, getting the effects together at the end. And they filmed for 14 and a half weeks. It was such an arduous task that George Lucas was like, I'm not doing this again. And he didn't for quite a long time in terms of directing. We should also say Ben Burtt.
I was wondering when you were going to get to Ben Burtt.
Ben Burtt is a very important, I think, person in this whole thing, because when you think of Star Wars, you do think of a lot of the sounds that he designed.
And the way he designed them. I remember when I was a kid, I watched they had the 77, it was probably 78 when they did it, the Making of Star Wars special, and Kellogg's cereal in the early 90s used to do these giveaways where you saved your proof of purchase and then put a little money in it and you got this video, and it was that. And they also had an Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi one. I used to watch them all the time. And when they always got to Ben Burt, I was just, he's just hitting a wire and then changing it. And creates, yeah.
Pew pew.
Yeah. I don't know. I think back then filmmaking had to be a lot of fun because you were just making stuff up to an extent. You know, you were, I feel like it was more creative.
Well, with the ILM guys, they didn't know how to do any of this stuff.
They had to invent it.
Figuring it out. Like George Lucas would take old World War II dogfight films and cut it together and say, well, this is what the space battle should look like. And all these guys had to go on was just this. So they just made it look like what he had edited together, footage from other films of just dogfights. And it created this thing that you'd never really seen before, of fast ships flying in and out of the camera and gumming up and over it and stuff. We take for granted that kind of thing now, but at the time, science fiction wasn't necessarily so exciting visually. And actually, the first cut of this movie apparently was not very exciting visually.
No, that's what I heard. Particularly the Death Star fight.
John Gibson was the original editor. Yeah. And he did the first cut, which I've seen clips, bits and pieces, and it is very dry. Yeah. Especially I think the clip they like to show the most is Obi-Wan and Darth Vader's sword fight, which looks very unexciting.
And what was George's motto? Was it faster, more intense?
Faster and more intense. And there was nothing about this cut that was fast or intense. It was, but Marshall Lucas to the rescue. Yep. His wife came in there and she helped him, and Paul Hirsch. And
you also have to mention she'd been editing for Scorsese.
Yeah. Yeah, because these guys were all kind of a little rat pack. Mm-hmm. They all knew each other. And so those guys they helped each other out. They had a little fraternity going, the old USC guys, and I think a lot of people came to the rescue, but we can't underestimate the power of George Lucas's imagination, because so much of just sprang right out of his fantasies.
And I'm sure, she being his wife helped a lot, because obviously she lived through all these writes and rewrites, and I'm sure he talked to, so she understood the vision is probably what I'm trying to get across, because just by being a spouse and living with him and working together.
And she was able to bring a lot of energy to the screen. Yeah. So much so that this movie that nobody understood when it was released earned $410 million. And that's just in its original worldwide run. Yep. $410 million in 1978.
And she got an Oscar.
That's right. Can you imagine that? $410 in 2019 is like, wow, what? Yeah. Maybe not for a Marvel movie, but for any other, certainly for a movie that costs, $9 million to make, it's just unbelievable.
And this is before we even get to the merchandising.
George jumped on the merchandising train, and he would have been stupid not to, because everybody wanted their own little Mark Hamill dolls.
Well, yes, and the issue was, the famous story of, Kenner didn't have the stuff ready for Christmas, so they came out with the early bird package, where you went and bought this box.
Literally.
A box, and it would later be like a little stand with a little background for when you did get your figures.
And then they'd send it to you, and then you put them in the box. Yeah. But first you just got the box.
That's all you got for Christmas that year, was a box.
Don't worry, kid, they're coming. But there was a lot of demand for these things. Mm-hmm. And George was like, great, there's a lot of demand for these things. And he starts to rake in this merchandising money. He was really smart when he kept those points.
And they don't keep it at action figures. We've got bed sheets. We've got lamps. We have remote control R2-D2s.
Tape dispensers. Soap. Everything. Anything
you could put Star Wars on, and they did.
Probably one of the greatest things were the T-shirts, because everyone wanted to wear a T-shirt.
When they take the soundtrack and make a disco album, I don't know, which I do own. Right. Maybe I shouldn't admit.
And a TV Christmas special.
Yes, which came later, the holiday special, which is notable because, not because, Maude is in it, but B. Arthur. Yes. But but because it's the first appearance of Boba Fett, that's
right.
why it's important. I mean, I'm a Star Wars fan, and I've watched it. It's a struggle. It is for me. It's a struggle to get through it. It's not really, you know.
Well, and for years you didn't actually have access to it.
No,
but when you got the internet and YouTube, shit, you can't get away from the holiday special.
That's right.
If you
Back
want
in
to
the
see the
day,
holiday special,
YouTube has it.
You don't know how lucky you are these days. Because
I
when we
know.
were younger, we were like this mythical holiday special.
Yep. You were lucky if like a documentary would show a clip of it.
Yeah.
Oh, there's okay.
Maybe you could afford to go to some convention somewhere. You'd have to like go out of state and find a really bad bootleg and buy it for $50. Now you can get it for free.
I mean, all you heard was, yeah, B. Arthur from Golden Girls was on it,
and she sings.
And Eunice's husband off of Carol Burnett was on it.
Who was the soul singer that sang?
Oh, God, was it? Because
there's
not Donna Summers, was it? What was her name?
It was somebody like that.
I can't remember her name. Oh my gosh! But yeah, she's seductively singing to Chewbacca's old pervert relative. It just looks very like
everybody was
getting
involved.
Excited by this seductively dressed, seductively singing singer.
Yes, Donna. We'll just call it Donna Summers. Someone on here will correct us, I'm sure, if it's wrong. But I want to jump to the special edition.
Yes.
Because at the end of each of these films that we're talking about, we're going to talk about the corresponding special edition, which came out in the 90s in preparation for the prequel. Well, the first batch, because the special editions have changed.
First one came out in January of 97. It came out January, February, March.
And in theaters.
You
could actually watch it, but you couldn't watch the original. You had to watch the special edition, which is George Lucas's version. He said that's the way he always wanted it to be.
Yeah, which a lot of people, when they were going to release the special edition, thought, why the hell are you re-releasing this? Who the hell's going to come see a movie? You got it on VHS. Well, people came. He built it, and then he came.
Yep, and it was all in preparation for the new movies.
Yep, that's right.
And we'll talk about that on the next show. We're not going to talk about it here because that's a whole discussion in and of itself. Another thing that's a whole discussion in and of itself is the Greedo controversy. You could do a whole show, and I'm sure many people have done 3-4 hour shows. We're not going to do it about this. Did Han shoot first?
See, thing. I have 2 VHS releases from the 80s. I eventually gave one that came out to my brother, but I still have the other one. And in that one, it's really badass that Han shot the guy. Yes.
I mean, that I think was the fans' point. Not to belabor the issue, because God knows we've fought this battle many times. But I think it's safe to say everyone agrees that Han did not strangely dodge with his head in some inhuman way this blast and then shoot Greedo.
No, he just shot Greedo.
And that's what makes
because he knows what's about to happen.
Right. It would be basically obviously not quite as intense, but if you did Taxi Driver, if Martin Scorsese did Taxi Driver and then changed the end where Travis didn't shoot anybody, you kind of take away the point of the character.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That tells you just that. You're like, oh, this is Han Solo.
Without any dialogue, nothing. It's a couple seconds.
Films used to do so beautifully back then.
And then George watched it and he realized, well, an action figure for a child should not be shooting another a fictional character first. I'm like, George.
But the character had his gun drawn and was going to take him to Jabba.
It was threatening him. I mean, his life was in peril.
And he's about to go make some dough to pay off Mr. Jabba.
But George got into this whole children's film thing.
Yes,
I mean, he really leaned into that one, and he used that to justify a lot of these changes. Another change to the special edition of A New Hope that I don't think was caused for that reason, was changed for the children's reason, is the whole Jabba the Hutt, putting him in there.
Yes.
And I remember when they showed that on Entertainment Tonight, a clip of that scene as the credits were rolling, and seeing that and going, oh no, it's not going to look like that, is it?
Yeah, he's much smaller. Well, because, I had seen in the making of Star Wars specials over the years, they would show you, oh yeah, we had to cut this scene out because we didn't have the money, and then we were going to put a mat over this actor, and it looked nothing like the Jabba the Hutt from Return of the Jedi.
It was just a guy.
It was a guy, yeah, a big guy, but even what they were going to, the artwork that they were going to mat, no, he was not like the slug looking thing.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And So they shot it that way because of what they had planned on doing, but then I guess time ran out, and also they probably couldn't, do it the way George wanted to do it, where it would look good. So they just decided, let's cut it out.
So they did this thing in the late 90s where it still looked terrible.
It's the Jello mold CGI, but
like, it didn't even, to me, it never really looked like Jabba in that.
And Jabba's so much smaller, which I guess people are saying, well, he's younger. I'm like, well, he must have ate a hell of a lot of fast food.
Well, it wasn't that many years. No. I mean, this wasn't like the prequel to the thing. This is like a couple years later.
Maybe he hit puberty. I don't know.
His eyes were weird. They didn't move right. Yeah. It didn't look right. It didn't look good.
It didn't look like Jabba.
Even in the time.
It looked like Jabba, but it didn't look like Jabba.
Like in 1997, it didn't look good. Like, sometimes you look at things that came out at that time and you're like, well, at that time, that looked pretty awesome. Yeah. I remember seeing this thing on Entertainment Tonight and going, ooh.
And the way they moved Han, because they were like, oh, we encountered this issue where Han circles around him, but how do we, because he's got the tail. So they had to move Harrison.
Where, like, he steps over the tail.
Yeah, and then Jabba's like, ooh.
Yeah. And then.
So cheesy.
But they eventually did. Kind of make him look a little better in one of the subsequent special editions, because as I said before, there's like 3 special editions, and you just
and I have the special edition on VHS that was released after the 97. So later that year, that fall, they released the special edition trilogy on VHS, and I got it in widescreen.
And then there was another release, I think, in DVD in 2004 that had different changes, because basically George realized
we'll get to that one when we get to Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Because George realized from the first special edition, which are the definitive versions, what people didn't like, and was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll change a couple things if I have to, because he was very belligerent by that point about these things. But let's move on to the second film in this original trilogy, which came out May 21st, 1980, and that was...
Empire Strikes Back.
What many people say is the greatest of the original trilogies, and many people say it's the greatest sequel ever made. And I think it's great in terms of being the second film in a trilogy. I think it's a perfect second film in a trilogy, which I think I said that before on our Back to the Future episode.
It's, what was it? Carrie Fisher said in a interview, it's the dark one. It's the spiritual one.
Yeah, it is dark. It was originally written not by George. He had the outline, but Lee Brackett, a lady named Lee Brackett, wrote it. But sadly, she died of cancer after she turned in her first draft. So George did a rewrite or two, and then he brought in another name that Star Wars fans generally react favorably to, even in spite of the Han Solo movie that came out a couple years back, Lawrence Kasdan. He did the final polish and the final few drafts of Empire.
Yes.
George, as I said before, was not going to direct this movie. He's had enough of directing.
I was going to say, because in the first film, didn't they take him to the hospital? I guess they thought he was having a heart attack or something. So
yeah, I mean, all I have to say is 14 and a half weeks. I'd have a heart attack.
I think, after that movie, he didn't return to directing for a long, long time.
Yeah, not until the prequels.
Yeah.
That was
the big thing. He's coming back to direct.
So from 1978 to 1999, there would be no directing for George Lucas. Shit ton of producing.
Yes.
Shit ton of writing in terms of story. But
he was an idea man.
He's a great idea man. And he was smart getting Lee Brackett. And even though he didn't like that first draft, he changed it. Yeah. But he was real smart getting Lawrence Kasdan, because Lawrence Kasdan is a great writer. And along with the director, Irvin Kershner, they really worked on this Empire movie and made it something really special.
And I read a book. There was a book that came out. And I read it when I was in high school. It was the late 90s. It was called Empire Building. And it's really interesting because I think there was even a chapter called You're Ruining My Movie. And it was, I guess that's supposedly how George felt about Empire as the production went on.
Well, Irvin Kershner was an older man, very talented director. And we should say Mark Hamill had a car accident between these two movies.
Between the two movies.
New Hope and Empire.
Yes.
Strikes Back.
Yes, and he had constructive surgery.
Which you can tell a slight difference. I never could tell when I was younger.
I remember thinking, actually, when I was a kid, and then when I started getting into it, before I found out about the car accident, I always thought he looked, I hope this isn't offensive, I always liked the photos from him from Empire Strikes Back. I was like, oh, he looks so cute.
So you liked him
I did. I was just like, I mean, I thought he was cute in the first movie, but the second movie was like, he's so cute.
Well, you can justify this thing because Luke has been at war.
Yes.
The resistance is fighting against the Empire for several years.
And he's not so boyish
Right.
anymore.
He's getting older.
I mean, he's getting hot-headed, but,
And he's going to Dagobah for training.
That's right. Maybe that's why I thought it was cute, running around that swamp with Yoda on his back.
Because this film introduces the famous Yoda. I mean, it's Yoda. What can I say?
Frank Oz.
Yoda. That he's first introduced here. A lot of things are introduced here.
And Lucas is nervous that we got this little green puppet over here. Is this gonna turn out okay? We got a little puppet over here.
And boy, did it turn out okay.
It turned out, yes.
It turned out like gangbusters.
Mm-hmm.
So Luke goes to Dagobah to train to learn the ways of the Jedi.
Yes.
With little Yoda, who he doesn't realize is a Jedi Master first because he's so small and froggish.
And Yoda is just hysterical.
Yeah.
He's like a little Sophia.
Mm-hmm. And you find out more of his backstory in the prequel, but it's explained here that Yoda knew Anakin. He knew Luke's father, and he lived through the events because Yoda is how many years old?
God,
800 years old,
yeah.
900 years old. So Yoda's been around for a minute. He was a part of the original Jedi Council that was wiped out when the uprising occurred that resulted in the Empire. This is also a film where a little plot twist is sprung upon after this big, huge, incredibly great fight that happens in this dark space lit mostly by lightsabers between Luke and Darth Vader at the end.
Yes, and you can also tell that the fight choreography with the lightsaber fight is much more
better.
I mean, I mean, it was, I don't know if it was because of Alec Guinness and he's older gentleman, or if they had it in the budget, because I've seen footage of them practicing and training and all this stuff that they did with Mark Hamill.
And David Prowse.
The film. Yeah, and
we should say David Prowse.
That's right.
He is a man I met one time. Very first convention I ever did, David Prowse was there. He was in Clockwork Orange when he was a younger guy. He was also Mr. Universe, I believe. He was a bodybuilder.
Didn't he train Ferrigno?
He did train Lou Ferrigno. He did a lot of training of quite a few people because he was, he is a huge guy. His body is in bad shape now, as is generally the case. I mean, he can't move his knees and stuff. But he was the man inside the suit. He was not the voice. The voice was far more ominous, slightly electronically enhanced James Earl Jones.
Yes.
And in this scene that we're talking about now, that voice comes in handy because a twist was added, not from Lee Brackett's script. This came in Kasdan's version.
Yes.
And it was withheld even from most of the people on the set and the actors. I think like 3 people knew it, right?
I think he told Mark.
Yeah,
Mark's
told Mark.
I'm like, we're on a first name basis, but because he had to react to this. But
so Mark, Lawrence Kasdan, George Lucas, and Kirshner.
Yeah,
were the 4 people who knew that Darth Vader was actually going to be revealed as Luke's father, and Mark Hamill's reaction is priceless.
Mm-hmm.
No. It's a much better no than another no that comes later. I'll tell you that much. And then he
should have got an Oscar for that reaction.
I gotta say this though,
stand by that.
He leaps off of that tower that they've been fighting on, and he falls in silent glory. Because
stoic.
We're gonna get to that in a second, and that really pisses me off.
Oh, it pissed me off.
Yeah. Did you see that in the theater, the special edition?
Yes, I did. Of course I did. I went opening.
Hold on. Don't get too riled up. We're not getting there quite yet. Okay, I just want to say before we get to the special edition, this movie had a $10 million higher budget. So it's like $18 million. And it made so much money, $500 million in its first run. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
And we also introduced another new character.
Lando
Calrissian.
Yes, Lando, played by the great
Billy D. Williams, who would later be Harvey Dent in the Batman films.
Lando Calrissian, that cunning rogue.
That's right, cunning rogue.
Yeah, but that's an inside joke. I don't know if anybody will get it. I'm sure the Star Wars fans will get that, but that cunning rogue. But and when you saw, he is fantastic, Amanda said over in the chat. That's right.
He was fantastic, yes.
When you saw the trailer for the new one, which we're not going to go into any further than this, but I'm referring to the one that comes out December of this year, and you saw Lando flying the Millennium Falcon, all the geeks go, wow, were you thinking, how are they going to kill him?
That's what I thought, actually. When I saw him, I said, oh, God, he's next.
Yeah. How unceremoniously are we going to take out Lando? But we'll save that for that show. Because we're going to cover that one too, that trilogy. But I just wanted to throw that in there because it popped into my head. Like when I saw Lando, I know everybody was like, "Yeah!"
And if he gets top billing, you know.
Yeah,
it seems to be the formula.
Yeah,
old cast member, higher billing.
Yeah,
villain.
That's right.
And
Harrison?
What happened to Wedge? Has he? Okay, all right. Because Wedge made it through all the original films, and I love Wedge. I read the X-Wings, books.
Maybe it's in one of the new comics because none of the old ones matter anymore.
No, it's no longer canon. After I spent all my money on it in the '90s and all my weekends reading it.
And this clearly could be a whole other show. But before we get into that show, I just want to jump into one thing real quick, and that's the special edition, because I'm really pissed off about this. I don't know if you got this, but in the first special edition, when Luke throws himself off of that tower like a boss after his hand was cut off by his father.
He was going to yell. His hand's already chopped off. So he's just like, okay, I got a piece out of here. And my only way is to fall. And whatever happens, happens.
And he falls and you see him fall in glorious silence.
That's right.
Not in the special edition, you don't.
No.
In the special edition, George went in there and added somebody who clearly is not Mark Hamill.
No, I guess Mark Hamill was busy, doing some voiceover work for Batman.
And you just hear this strange, disembodied voice that's clearly not the actor going, no! As he falls. And you go, what the fuck is that? Like when you sat in the theater and you saw that,
I cringed.
Did you? Yeah, you sat up straight, right?
That is not Luke. That is not Luke falling and screaming no. He already had his no moment with his
He just
daddy.
did it.
Yes, saying, you're my dad and you just chopped off my hand. What the hell's going on? And Ben has lied to me.
And I can live with that no.
I've lived with a lie my whole life. My life is a lie.
That's right. And I just lost my hand. He's noed out.
So yeah, he's just like, I don't care if I hit something at this point, probably. He's just like, what the hell ever.
And then they changed it.
And
there he goes.
Ooh.
Yep.
He sounded like a little ghost, almost like, ooh.
Yeah, it was really weird. It was kind of a crazy choice. Like, I don't see how George Lucas was in there. Because, he was in, he's in the recording booth. Because every time you see him in a recording booth, he's the one directing it. Because he's so anal about everything. Now, you're telling me that he directed a guy to do that and thought that sounded great?
That's what I was missing. That's what I wanted.
Man.
And they ruined my movie.
Like the other major change I get, because, they changed the Emperor's face. That was the one I was referring to, because they changed it to Ian McDermott, which was the Emperor later. They hadn't cast him yet, but he was the Emperor in Jedi. And so they went back and they put him in there, because originally it was Clive Revell. As voice, and then it was Marjorie Eaton was the face with a mask on, like this prosthetic thing. And they went back in, they put Ian McDermott. Like that I get. Yeah. Because it's continuity. Yeah. And it kind of looked better when you got the final design of the Emperor. It looked better than the one with the weird eye and looked kind of like a baboon or something. It was weird. Yeah.
But you really couldn't see it too clearly. It was a hologram. You could just chop it up. Oh, it's a hologram.
That I have no problem.
They hadn't gotten HD on their hologram yet.
I had no problem with that, but I have to draw the line.
Well, other things they did with the Empire Strikes. Well, I remember going to see the special edition for Empire Strikes Back, because the first one there were so many changes. It was like, oh, it's worth the ticket. The second one there wasn't a lot of stuff they added. They added a little more to the Wampa scene.
Yeah.
Then Cloud City, they jazzed it up.
Yeah, they put a lot of windows in there.
Yeah.
That weren't in there before, and you just saw more of the city.
But there weren't any new scenes.
And all the Cloud City looked like every city from the prequel.
Yeah.
When you saw it out the window in the new one, it just looks like the prequel.
Yeah.
With the same kind of sky and
but like I said, it wasn't like the first film episode 4, episode 6, where it's new things.
Yeah.
Brand new scenes.
Well, we have a lot to talk about.
New versions of the scene.
There's a lot of special edition stuff we're about to talk about.
Well, we forgot to mention in the first one, and I was disappointed. What did I get? Because I know George Lucas called it American Graffiti in Outer Space. The big scenes. He only added the one towards the end a little bit more, but all the Luke going down and seeing his buddies and seeing Biggs, he didn't add in.
No. But
so we'll see if there will be my brother always joked, there'll be a very, very special edition.
These special editions will be going on for years. But let's go on to this Return of the Jedi.
Yes.
May 25th, 1983. These are coming in fairly rapid succession, couple years apart each. There was a lot of very interesting choices for the director. And I'm going to go through a couple of them. We don't have time to go into each one of them in great detail, but like Steven Spielberg promptly said no, because he wasn't going to. He was like, George, you do it. And George was like, I'm not doing it. Now,
I got my own shit.
The one really interesting one that everyone talks about is David Lynch.
Yes.
David Lynch went up to George's house and talked to him and drove around with him and was apparently terrified in this car with him. And was shown the Ewoks, because this was introduced in the Jedi, these Ewok characters on Endor.
And I'll get to that in a minute.
And David Lynch was like, his quote was that he had I have next to zero interest in Star Wars, is what David Lynch said.
I just like mounds of dirt.
All I want is mounds of dirt and Dune. Because that's what he went on to do instead of Star Wars, was Dune. He says, all I want is Twin Peaks and Dune.
Yes.
And so I would love to have seen Jedi directed by David Lynch.
I think that would have been interesting.
But let me tell you, David Lynch would not have liked that experience.
No.
If he hated Dune and he had a lot of creative input in that, he would not have liked Jedi.
And what would have Lucas's reaction been?
Well,
if it had happened, how would those? I don't know. Maybe it would have been like, okay.
I don't know. I don't think
but
that.
I don't know how George and old Lynch.
Yeah.
Their visions for a Star Wars film. Maybe something else. But
now I'll put it this way: I would love to see that film.
Yes, I would too.
Another version I'd love to see is the David Cronenberg version, because that was another guy that he talked to, and David Cronenberg wasn't really interested in doing it because he was about to do Videodrome and The Dead Zone, Stephen King's The Dead Zone. So. He was a little busy at the time. Richard Marquardt.
Yep.
He did the film. He took the job in the end. Lawrence Kasdan returned to write the script. Lawrence Kasdan said, Return of the Jedi. The original title was too weak. We got to have a better title. George Lucas said, how about Revenge of the Jedi? Lawrence was like, great.
So, folks, if you got that Revenge of the Jedi merchandise out there, you probably already know you're sitting on something you could eBay the hell out of it.
Because, spoilers, George changed it back. It was Return, then it was Revenge, and then he changed it back at the last minute to Return of the Jedi because he said Jedis do not
seek revenge.
Right, even though Luke deserved it.
He did.
Harrison Ford actually wanted to get killed off in it.
He did. He wanted a hero's death. He said he has no mama, no papa, no past, no story. No purpose. We've ended what his deal was. Just let him go out in a blaze of glory.
Yeah, which would have been interesting.
With
Lando returned too in this, and he's changed around a little bit.
We get Mon Mothma.
We do.
And Admiral Akbar.
And Leia's steel bikini.
Yes, which she talked about wasn't like a regular bikini. So when she sat a certain way, she said that the guy playing Boba Fett could see all the way down to Miami.
Now, Boba Fett's death. Let's talk about that real quick. Boba Fett's death is a little, I don't know.
Some people think it's anticlimactic.
It's to me, it's a little anticlimactic.
But this is before it was declared not canon, but in the expanded universe in the 90s, particularly, there was I think it was a Topps trading card, Star Wars Galaxy. And it's him, and he's escaped the Sarlacc pit, but he's burnt like acid, like he'd been in there. Yeah. And he got out of it, and he survived.
See, but I wouldn't have known about that because I only watched the movies.
I know. So you weren't dedicated.
No, I was not dedicated. I was not like, Rebecca, I think, is clearly the bigger of the Star Wars fans here. I'll tell you another thing. You talking about documentaries, behind the scenes shit that always fascinated me. The speeder chase.
God, I love that.
Redwood National Park. Well, it wasn't the Redwood National Park. Endor, but
the documentary that came out at the time was called From Star Wars to Jedi. Or was it To Jedi from Star Wars? I can't remember.
Whichever way, the way they did that, the way they filmed the plates for that, where Garrett Brown, the guy who invented the Steadicam, actually did that. And he would walk very slowly, shooting at a high frame rate, through this forest for long, long stretches.
Yes.
and he would just slowly walk through it. And then when you played because it was high-speed film, when you played it back, it just was shooting, and they were shooting through this forest on Endor, and it was amazing.
And in that film, I think my favorite parts are the Jabba the Hutt stuff and then the speeder.
Not the Ewoks.
When I was little, I was like, oh, it's like a little puppy. But,
Yeah.
As you get older, you're like...
You get a little tired of the Ewoks. Yeah. But I mean,
although I do love Warwick Davis.
I do, yes.
Come on.
Yes. And
he was good as Wicket. I liked Wicket. But still,
there was something about him, George Lucas, and like characters with W names.
Yeah, because Willow.
Yeah.
But because originally, according to the documentaries, that Lucas, when he originally wrote Star Wars, he wanted to have a big battle with Wookiees.
Mm-hmm.
But he already had a Wookiee.
Which makes sense.
And also probably because he wanted to make more action figures. He's like, oh, I'll just make them backwards. Instead of really tall, they'll be short. Instead of long hair, short hair. So that's how I got the Ewoks. Haha, it sounds like Wookiee Ewok. Ewok.
I kind of like the Wookiee idea, though.
Yeah, I think that would have been cool because
it makes sense because they're up in the trees and they're using the forest as weapons.
Yeah, and also you see where Chewbacca came from and how they could have gotten into the whole story of where Han saved him from being enslaved by the Empire.
For Harrison Ford to do,
yes,
he would have had more to do, which might have made him.
Find out that
actually this makes a lot more sense.
Because I remember my my Star Wars Topps trading cards. There was a he's tired of hearing this.
Which I never had.
But they had a card, and in the background you see it's like a close up, and it's his hand, and in the background is Wookiee fur and part of Chewbacca's thing, and he's holding, and it looks like his Imperial officer card. And there's like a little drawing of Harrison as Imperial officer, and you see him burning it. It's very 60s Vietnam. Burning my draft card thing. But yeah, basically the story was he was an Imperial and he saved Chewbacca, and that created the life debt, and so he got the heck out of the Imperial don't you think
that
him and Chewbacca take off and become smugglers?
In your mind, isn't that story better than if you watched the Ron Howard film?
Yes.
I mean, that's just me. That's my personal opinion. Some stories are better when you have them in your head.
Yes, and that was the story I grew up hearing. That's where Han. I mean, we had the books, Han Solo at Star's End, and all, but they were already the adventures he was having with Chewbacca. But yeah, but I do remember this Topps trading card, and I remember thinking, oh, that's so cool.
Well, the budget increase on Jedi, by the way. Huge over even the last one. It was like somewhere between $35 and $42 million.
Yes.
And of course, they made that back in spades.
And the creature shop for that, my goodness. I mean, once again, behind the scene footage of them building the creatures, the puppets. I mean, Jabba the Hutt had what, 3 guys in it, 4 guys in it? How many? 3.
There was quite a well. There was the guy with the face, and then there had to be a guy in there to control the body movements.
There was a guy on the right, guy on the
levers.
left, and then the guy at the tail.
Yeah, definitely not CGI. That Jabba the Hutt.
No, and he had his own makeup people too.
And there were a lot of things that were added special edition wise.
Yes.
With that whole sequence, because when you get into if we want to jump into that. You get into the band, the Max Rito band is like a totally different set than what you had in the original.
Before it was, Sice Noodles is a puppet. And I know George wasn't happy. He was like, oh, she her mouth kind of moved a little bit. And they wrote a song called Lefty Neck, which was about working out.
Yeah. And it was like 80s. A shorter song.
Yeah,
too.
It was a shorter song. And it was also really interesting for all the movies, if we're going to talk about this song, how they came up with languages. They didn't just come up with gibberish. They actually tried to come up with a language.
The Tolkien thing of creating the actual language.
Yeah. And that song, Lefty Neck, was, when you see it in the creature shop, you hear the English version, and then on set, there's the...
That's interesting.
There's the...
But there's no... But the Jedi Rocks doesn't have... It's just in English, isn't it?
No.
It's not?
It is not.
Oh, okay.
It is not.
I must admit, I'm not as familiar because I don't like watching a lot of the special. And when I get to that part in Jedi, I kind of tend to skip over it because
I didn't like the song. I like the old song.
Well, the CGI on that looks really bad. Like it hasn't aged well.
No.
With like the slobber that comes out of the guy's mouth, and then her lips come at you like it's almost supposed to be a 3D film.
Yeah.
Doesn't look good. Like the closer that gets to the camera, the
and
sketchier.
I watched it again last night, and I remember sitting there thinking, I don't like it.
It's 2 minutes long too, by the way. It's a long fucking song.
The puppets couldn't do as much as your CGI, but.
Well, I mean, do you really need a 2-minute dance number at this point?
No, we don't need a music video because they added dancers. Because before it was just the two dancers, and then they've added like backup singers and.
Well, what did you think of was the same scene, Ula, going down in that pit, the pit?
I mean, she always fell in the pit.
Yeah, but what do you think about seeing what happened to her in there? Was that necessary?
You don't really see her, but you see her down there.
I mean, but was that necessary to add
that? Didn't bother me as much. I mean, I was already, Jedi Rocks distracted me.
I thought it was kind of cool that they took the same actress and put her in the makeup.
Yes, which they said she was like a dancer, so she was still in the same, shape.
It's pretty seamless.
Yes.
You would think that was in the original if you had not seen a difference. That, to me, that part doesn't bother me.
No.
I think that's fine.
No.
I was like, okay, so we follow her down there and we hear her scream again. It's great. Yeah. So that's cool. But then
I remember as a kid, I always wanted her to survive because I just always picture her escaping with Loman.
She was a cool design.
Yeah, she was. She was really cool.
She looked good, but that's not that's not where the special edition changes in. Not with this one. This one I think has the most controversial. Well, you would say the Greedo thing was a pretty one, but if you look at it, at the amount of controversial changes in Jedi,
they changed Sarlacc. Which a friend. I watched it last night with someone else. I'm going to remain nameless, but they made the comment. They said, I know it wasn't as high tech as the CGI, but the old one was just the tentacles coming out, and you just saw the teeth, but you don't know what's down there. That's creepier to me. Then you see this little thing coming up, this little beak thing coming up, like it's
it reminded me of is Little Shop of Horrors.
That's exactly what they said. They said. Yeah.
That's what it was. That's what it looked like. It was like George saw Little Shop of Horrors and was like, I got to get that in Jedi. What was I thinking? Mm-hmm. Well, let me just say one more change, though, because this goes back. This sort of I guess maybe because it happens at the end, but it's another no thing. Because at the end of this movie, Vader screams no.
Yeah.
And it happens to be the same no. It sounds to me like the exact same no they used in the prequel. Where, somehow, I guess they paid him. James Earl Jones, they convinced him to go, no! And he does that exact thing when he picks up the Emperor at the end in the special edition.
Where to me, it's much more effective if he's just quiet and he picks him up and chunks him.
Yeah. It
chunks him over the edge.
It's weird. I mean, does George think that he needs to have characters in order to drive home the point that they don't agree with the situation? Just scream randomly, no!
I mean, obviously we know he's not in agreement. He picks the guy.
And he throws him down a giant fucking tube. And the guy gets blown up with electricity. A tube. Yeah, and he gets blown up with electricity. We know, well, maybe he didn't get blown up with electricity. I don't know. But it's not looking like you got blown up with electricity.
I mean, the 90s expanded universe, I mean, comes back in his clone bodies. You go in his little clones.
Do you think that's the route they're going to take with the new one?
I mean,
I don't want to go down that road too far, but
I don't know.
Possibly. Well, probably not, because they talked about
clones and the
well,
comic books.
You know what they said about Rey?
Yeah,
she has multiple clones and shit. But anyway,
supposedly she's a clone off his hand, which I think was in a story at one point. There was clones off it. It was at least
my thing is
Luke Skywalker with extra U's or something.
I don't know that they would go that route, because they've already said they don't want to do anything that was in the stuff that used to be canon, the expanded universe. So I don't know.
There's no Mara Jade.
But anyway, we'll go. Oh, and also, this is kind of did it bother you at all that he didn't have eyebrows? That when they took off the mask, Anakin has no eyebrows in this.
No,
that didn't bother me either. I think that's fine. There was another musical change at the very end.
Yeah, at the time when it came out, it didn't bother me. I think it's a very pretty song, But I still, I mean, I know the Ewok song's corny, but I kind of like them. Yep, yep.
I like Yum Nub.
Yep, yep.
I have to say, even more like the Jedi Rocks thing. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I was kind of stung when they took out Yum Nub because I like Yum Nub.
Although, the way they edited poor Lando clapping his hands to Yum Nub, it looks like has no rhythm. And we know that is not true.
Lando definitely has.
He's got rhythm. I mean, come on.
Same scene though. The most controversial change of all: Anakin Skywalker's Force Ghost.
Well, that was changed later. That wasn't in that.
No, well, it wasn't filmed yet.
Yeah.
In the first special edition, but we have to address that because, well, I don't think
it was Sebastian.
The what's his face, Darth Vader's no, when he threw the Emperor didn't come until 2004.
Yes.
And obviously Anakin didn't come until 2004 because they were still making the.
I mean, it was.
He wasn't cast when they did the first special edition.
Yeah.
And perhaps it should have stayed that way.
Yeah, it was the original actor that was revealed.
Yes, the Sebastian.
Sean?
Something like that. Whatever his name is, it was him.
I can't remember his name.
Which makes perfect sense because Luke just saw him just without eyebrows. So Luke would look at him and go, I know you. You're my father.
Yes.
This leering 20-year-old shows up. And what I was always thinking was when I saw that, like, why isn't Luke going, well, there's Yoda. Oh, and there's Ben. Who's that guy?
I know.
How would he know?
Who's that young SOB standing there leering at me angrily?
But he acts like he knows.
Whereas the original Anakin, he looks like a happy, sweet old man standing there.
And he just saw him.
Yes.
I mean, he basically looks like the guy, only without hair and eyebrows.
Yes. He was toe up from the flow up.
So it would make sense that Luke would be able to, It was a terrible edit and change. Amanda says so too, and I happen to agree with you, Amanda.
Yes, thank you, Amanda.
I think we all agree that this was the worst change of them all.
It doesn't make any sense. But I guess they're like, well, he died back. I don't know if the reason is, he really died when he was. No, he didn't. No. If he still had good in him and Luke saved his tail, then that means he died when he died.
He killed the Emperor. How much? I mean, he redeemed himself. And ultimately, that's what George said the entire story was about. Anakin redeeming himself. But I don't know. I'm still at a loss about that, too, because, I'm not 100% sold that George saw this all.
You can still listen to Num Num, by the way, on YouTube.
Oh, can I?
Yeah, you can find it in Lefty Neck.
I can watch the scene with it? Or
I'm
just
sure
the music?
Can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can find all kinds of stuff. But yeah, you can also listen to the old.
Did they ever release the original on DVD or Blu-ray? I'm talking about the original cut. So you can only get one of the special editions on DVD and Blu-ray? That sucks.
Because I only have the originals.
Imagine.
On VHS. And then I have the first special edition that came out in 97 that was released in theaters on VHS. But you could gotten that one on DVD, but at the time I didn't have a DVD player, so I got it on VHS and widescreen. Mm-hmm. And I've never bought any more.
Yeah, it just seems like you can make. I would
like to have the originals. As I say, all originals. She's saying all 9 are VHS, but are the episodes 4 through 6 special edition cuts? Or are they the versions that we grew up with, Amanda?
I don't think they have those on DVD. If you don't have those on DVD yet, I think that you're missing the chance to make a lot of bank.
Yeah. And if you haven't seen them, which, I mean, if you can't get it, then, or if you haven't pirated them, you should definitely check them out, the originals, and compare.
Well, I think we've covered this. We've kind of gone over our time a little bit, but I will tell you one thing. We're going to be back and we're going to be talking about the prequels. And that will be our next Star Wars theme show. I had a good time. What about you, Rebecca?
Yep, I had a good time. I was reading the comment.
Reading the chat.
She had responded. She says all of hers are VHS. Okay.
Yeah, so, I don't think you can get that on. But
come on, Disney, you bought Fox.
Well, no kidding. You're missing a lot of bank.
You can re-release all of them. It's like all of the versions of the original trilogy right here in this beautiful box set. And we'll also do a very, very special edition with the Biggs scenes in the episode 4. How about that?
Yeah, there you go.
Watch all of it.
Why not? Hell.
Why not?
Well, we'll release everything else.
She asked about the Ewok movies. Yes, they did release 2 more Ewok movies after Star Wars. There was a droid TV show, comic book, an Ewok show, but they did 2 Ewok movies, Caravan of Courage and Battle for Endor. The first one was about her and her brother trying to save the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one, and her name's Sindel. And the second one basically puts you in a complete tank of depression in the first 10 minutes and traumatizes you because they kill her entire family and a bunch of Ewoks, the bad guys do, and it's just her and Wicket running away. And
was it worse than Return to Oz?
And they find Wilford Brimley, is who I like to call it,
Mm-hmm.
and this little furry creature, and they become friends with him, and they defeat the bad guys, and then they fly up. Her and the Wilford Brimley guy, they fly off into space, and they leave Wicket behind, and he's like,
Well, there's spoilers on the Ewoks movies.
Sorry, yeah. So if you're into the Ewok movies, there you are. I think they were done by Disney, I guess, or in conjunction with their production. But yes, you can get those on DVD, both on the same disc back if you're into DVDs.
Well, there you go. Well, there's no need to now.
I'm sorry I spoiled the Ewok movies for you, but it was traumatizing for me.
All right, guys. Well, we've reached the end of this show. We're going to be back with more Star Wars. Go watch some Ewok movies. May the Force be with you. Take care of yourselves.